Hello, everybody. Welcome to this talk, and thank you for taking time out of your busy days for this. I'm sorry I can't see any of you. I don't know if that's part of the process here. So, if I kind of look like I'm staring into space, it's because I can't really see anyone in the webinar itself. So, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm one of the counselors here at Parkinson Society BC and I have been so for about getting on 6 years now. And I'm also a private practice counselor in BC. And I specialize in working with people who have chronic health conditions and learning so much from everyone about Parkinson's just from the type of experiences I have listening to people. And very much looking forward to learning from you today as well. So I'm hoping this will be quite an interactive presentation and we'll have a chance to put your hands up and chat with me along the way. And we're going to have some questions and answers at the end as well. So why don't we just get started, Kelly? I'm going to ask Kelly to advance the slide. We're going to talk about burden, burnout, and support. So the outline overall is going to be related to exploring some measures and some orientation towards caregiver experiences. So we're going to be talking about burden and labels like compassion fatigue and burnout. But what I want to do is to kind of take a more novel approach to look at these labels and these categories uh, based on nervous system functioning and regulation. So it's one thing to know that you're in a certain place with your caregiving journey, but another thing to say, okay, what do I do next? How do I access resources, for example? And so I'd like to talk a little bit more about nervous system functioning and the ways that that can inhibit and or help to move forward to get more resources and get more support. So we're going to be talking about how to also look at your unique experiences and needs and to be able to express your needs more clearly to the people around you that you're that are going to be able to help you. We'll talk also about grief in terms, again, of the way that it affects nervous system and how to sort of perhaps open up some space to be able to process grief and the many types of grief that are involved in the caregiving process. And again, look at resources. I think we should talk and share about resources. And I'm going to be talking mostly about sort of internal resourcing as well and how that helps you to access external resources. And we can just review some tools that might be helpful for resourcing as well in terms of sort of a body-based approach is what I'm going to be sharing with you based on nervous system function and regulation. So that's that. Let's move on to caregiver burden. I really wanted to start to talk about burden more than burnout. I think it's a very useful term to be able to establish a sense of how much you're carrying, to validate the type of weight and the type of experiences that are borne by the caregiving process. And so we can think of caregiver burden as a strain or load that you experience over time. Again, the next slide is going to illuminate why over time is important. And it's also important because caregiver burden looks at the person who's rendering or offering the care and support, but it also looks at the person who's receiving the support and the type of variations and the sort of what they bring to this situation that makes things more challenging and difficult, but what also might make things a little bit easier to move forward with. Next one. Thanks, Kelly. So we're going to look at sort of three attributes of caregiving burden, and this is from a concept analysis. So there's a concept analysis in 2020 by Liu, Hefferman, and Tan. And they looked at sort of the concept of caregiver burden. And they were able to kind of look at certain elements of this concept that seemed to be the most important. One of them was self-perception. Who do you perceive yourself to be now in relation to who you were before you were in the caregiver role? What sort of perspectives you have on who you want to be and how to maintain your boundaries around who you are. They also looked at multifaceted strain. So the difference in the layers and the levels and the variability of strain that add to the load for caregivers. And they also looked at the duration of time, right? And I have that glass of water there because, there's that old adage about carrying something, like holding something. If you hold a glass of water for a short time, it doesn't feel too heavy. But if you hold the glass of water for a long time, that can start to feel really, really heavy. So the duration of time adds to the load. And that is a very key element in terms of when you might talk about your boundaries, when you might talk about edges, when it's getting too much for you. Time has a lot to do with that. Okay, and next. So there are many measures of caregiver burden. And now Kelly is advancing the slide because if anyone knows me, they know I did something wrong. And so Kelly had to help me with the electronics. I don't know if we're going to be, now Kelly, the one in the top left-hand corner has a link that should automatically, oh no, might not open because it's on a PDF. It's okay. We can talk about this. When you get the slides, perhaps I'm gonna send these links separately. But what I'd like to share with you is this. There's many, many caregiver burden measures. The question is, how useful are they for you? And which ones might you be more attracted to using? The one in the top left corner is a very well-known caregiver burden instrument. It's used a lot in studies, and they have different variations. The first one was started in like the 80s, and it had 22 items in it. And then there's 15 and 9. There's like short forms of this burden instrument. But what it does is it allows you to sort of answer some questions and get a number, and then start to notice, okay, this is where I'm at right now. This is how much loading I have, in terms of how much I'm carrying in my life. And that there's other ones that can be helpful to kind of get an idea of where you want to go with this in terms of your support and what you might be needing, because they have categories in them that also suggest what areas you might need a little bit more help with, or where you're having the most difficulties or challenges with your caregiving overall. The one in the right-hand corner is really interesting because that one is a neuropsychiatric inventory. And so it talks about not only the caregiver's distress levels, but it has a corresponding symptom of the person you're caring for and the level of challenges that person might be having with those symptoms. And a neuropsychiatric approach is looking at some of the cognitive issues and the functional issues. This is a general tool, but it is used with people living with Parkinson's because they have these symptoms that are separate from the motor symptoms, but that are very, very challenging, like hallucinations and impulsivity and disinhibition and apathy and all of the different agitation, depression, all of these symptoms are in an inventory like that. So it has the symptom, and then it has the caregiver distress associated with that neuropsychiatric symptom. So that might be an interesting tool for you to explore. There's also an interesting tool that was studied by a Dutch group of researchers. And what they did was they took the factors in the one I was talking about in that top left-hand corner of the previous slide, the 22 factors, and they used a statistical technique. It's called factor analysis. And they kind of distilled them into 3 main factors: role intensity, and that could be measured by time spent doing things, but also subjective variables in that, and role strain, what's more difficult to access, what's more difficult to do for you as an individual in your context, social restriction, and anger. And these are quite often connected with the grief process. And the quote actually says anger there, but when you look at the article, it generally talks about negative feelings: anger, sadness, frustration, irritation. And these are the emotions that very commonly come up with in the process of grief and the challenges with loss and having to encounter that. And the third factor is self-criticism. Again, similar to the other researchers, talking about how we view ourselves and what are we using to support ourselves in the role, and our expectations of what we think we should be doing and where we're at, and how we can get into a very self-critical mode because of that. Compassion fatigue, another term that I just wanted to look at just for a short time in this talk, because of one main factor. Compassion fatigue relates to a loss. It is like having a disconnection with your sense of self and your needs, because it involves the erosion of personal boundaries. So what we see with compassion fatigue is that the people who are giving the care, rendering the care, they become very highly over-invested in the pain and the suffering of the person that they're caring for. And that can lead to them feeling the feelings in such a way where they don't have the distance. Sorry, we're just going to go back. I think the last slide, someone was asking a question. Again, I don't have access to seeing this stuff.
I can read the question now. So the question says, can you name the last right-hand side name of the inventory? Neuropsychiatric inventory, I guess.
Up here. That's what it's, yeah. That's what it's called, as far as I know. I'll send it to you. I'll send the link to you. Okay. Yeah, that is the name of the inventory, as far as I know. I'll send that full name for you. Yeah. So the compassion fatigue, though, is another important concept, right? Because like I said, it's looking at the erosion of personal boundaries. And so when there's that lack of distinction between kind of like yourself and others, the person that you're caring for, it tends to involve you kind of take on pain in a different way, and it's harder to find the distance you need to regain your sense of a center and regain your sense of energy and comfort, because there's an overinvestment in the pain of the other person that you're caring for. It also, compassion fatigue involves sort of a change in the way of thinking. And usually it's from survival mode, right? Where we start to get into some um, thinking that happens when your nervous system gets activated and we become very highly focused and can get lost in this focus on certain things only. And then the flexible thinking in terms of problem solving starts to fall away. And it makes it it's very taxing and very difficult. People can feel very stuck when they're sort of involved in compassion, having compassion fatigue. It also involves isolation usually because we start to get that sense of I need to do everything myself. And I don't have time or energy to involve other people. They won't do it in the way that I want them to do it. And that again leads to a sense of basically overriding personal needs, get out of touch with yourself and what you need when there's compassion fatigue. Okay, the next slide, Kelly. So caregiver burnout, again, that's kind of, we might consider kind of the end of the line. There's lots of information about how to prevent burnout. The question is, if you do a caregiver burnout questionnaire and you find out you're burned out, what next? What do I do? So the exhaustion and sort of the kind of physical and emotional, mental exhaustion that comes with a sense of being burned out can make it harder for you to get the energy to even change anything, to get the energy to even reach out and get some support because you just don't have the energy at the end of the day to do anything differently. Yeah. Can I ask, kind of slow it down here a little bit and ask people, uh, what do you experience when you hear the terms like caregiver burnout? How does that land on people? Guilty. Yeah. Yeah. There can usually be a lot of emotions that arise with this topic. Yeah. Ah, yeah. Hit a wall. Yeah. So hitting a wall, losing energy, kind of having emerging, crying. Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to see other participants too. I agree. I'm feeling like I'm kind of talking to myself here. I don't know why we can't, but maybe there's a reason we can't. Exhaustion, fatigue. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no other options, right? Feeling cornered. When you feel burned out, there's that sense of sort of feeling cornered. Yeah, no sense of control. Yeah, over your time. Limited choices, very, very limited choices. Kelly, can I ask you, is there a way so that we can see each other, or are there just too many people to be able to show everybody?
Um, I could try to add everyone onto the panel, then we would have to stop the recording
Okay,
because, yeah. So it might be better this one, and then the next one we could plan for it to have a meeting format.
sure, sure. Yeah. Well,
Sorry.
thank you for sharing, everybody. Yeah, no, thanks, Kelly. That's fine. But this is exactly we can feel the feelings and have the experiences of this, and now the question still remains, what do we do, right? So, if you are noticing that you are feeling burned out, if there's going to be some what you might typically hear. And if you do the questionnaires, it'll say, reach out to your family physician, try and join a support group. And all of that is very, very important to be able to talk with someone, to be able to share with someone. So the rest of the session is going to be of this talk is going to be about reaching out, but it's also going to look at how to kind of get the energy and get the momentum and the direction going to reach out in a way that might be effective for you. Yeah. Okay, Kelly. Um, so what I'm going to be talking about are mainly uh, therapies and approaches that relate to the body. So somatic, soma is the body, isn't so soma is a term that's used for body, right? So somatic oriented therapies really pay attention to the experiences that we have in our bodies and what we can learn from them. And it's almost always about slowing down and about paying attention to the self. And of course, that's very important for us to know, for example, what we need. It's very important for us to start looking at how to change and design or redesign or define our boundaries that can be easily intruded upon and they can be lost altogether in different parts of the caregiving process. So somatic oriented approach is a relatively new way of looking at counseling and therapy, and it's found itself to be very useful um, for people in settling, organizing, learning about where they're at in order to know where to go next and what to do to help themselves. Okay, so let's advance there, Kelly. Thank you. So again, I talked about introduce the idea of nervous system loading. And so what we're looking at here primarily is about um, the type of burden or fatigue or burnout, whatever term you want to use or process you want to use to explore. It involves loading of the nervous system, right? And we can find out that there are internal experiences that can help to take the load off. And there's also external processes and supports that will help to take the load off, right? So the internal ones are the ones that we'll mostly be focusing on for the rest of the talk today. And in terms of balance, this is really an important concept, right? If we think about balance as being really health is about finding balance. It's not about the eradication of a disease. It's not about something completely going away. It's more about how you can find a sense of balance with the type of loading and the type of stressors you're living with in your life. Okay, Kelly. So I'm just going to do an introduction here for nervous system information because nervous system regulation, it really talks a lot about nervous system function. So you can see in the picture here, these are the parasympathetic and the sympathetic branches of the nervous system are very important. They really are what we talk about when the body's under stress and the way that the body responds to stress. Now, these are both parts of the nervous system that are autonomic or automatic. So there's a whole bunch of processes that are happening with us that are really outside of our conscious control. And yet they can be modified or supported with conscious ways to think about what's going on and to make meaning about what's going on. So they're not completely separate from our consciousness and our way of thinking about things, but they happen in the absence of thinking as well. And so what we want to talk about mostly today are the sympathetic nervous system, sympathetic branch, which we consider to be mostly involved with fight and flight. So that's that activating system. It goes on board first. When encountering any stress or challenges or something new, our sympathetic nervous system gets going and can mobilize us, right? So we need sympathetic nervous system responses to help us mobilize and to cope. But what can happen with ongoing caregiving, the burden of caregiving, is that the sympathetic system gets caught in sort of like overdrive because it's really meant to be responding to something that's threatening or dangerous, and then we should naturally have a break from it. But with Parkinson's and with the caregiving process overall, there's often no sense of a break. It just goes on and on and on. And so the sympathetic system can get really activated and ramped up and kind of stay in that activated state more than it needs to be and more than it should be. The opposite of that is the parasympathetic nervous system. Oh, oh,
Sorry about that.
so
I
it's
clicked on
okay.
the screen.
Parasympathetic nervous system, and that is the rest and digest system. So that is the one that is helping us with settling, calming, noticing safety. We usually have to make space in our lives and our sort of consciousness to be able to let that parasympathetic nervous system come on board. Doesn't come on board uh, in the same way. It doesn't get activated in the same way that the sympathetic nervous system does. So we usually have to kind of create a sense of space for the parasympathetic nervous system to start to activate. So some of these somatic therapies, a lot of them are about how do we sort of find this parasympathetic state and how do we build and grow and use tools to open up the space for the rest and digest system to come on board. That's the system that's involved also with being open to connection and being open to other people and feeling connected. That's a very important part of the parasympathetic nervous system process, as well as that essential sense of being connected. The freeze state there is it's like a breaker that goes off. So we're going to talk about that, what the freeze state is. So sometimes we think of fight, flight, and freeze in the sympathetic part of the nervous system, but the freeze response is actually a little bit more of a parasympathetic process that it shuts us down, and we'll talk a little bit more about why that happens and how we can sort of limit some of the freezing that can happen with stress. Okay, next one. Thanks, Kelly. So another tool, or another concept I want you to think about. Or does anyone have any questions, by the way? Sorry, I'm going too fast as usual. My sympathetic nervous system's going really fast. Okay, so let's just move on then. So the neuroception is another concept to explore. Now, neuroception is also something that's like a reflexive experience. It happens. Our nervous systems are always scanning our environments for safety, right? And for noticing. And we don't consciously kind of recognize that our nervous systems are doing this, but they're kind of doing it all the time, taking things in. And so we might start to detect triggers for risk that click into this autonomic nervous system response. And why neuroception becomes important is because it can help answer why sometimes we get really ramped up about something that we consciously shouldn't. Like people might say, why are you so upset about that? And why are you going, why is this such a big thing for you? And you might be wondering that yourself. Part of it is that it's because your nervous system's sort of picking things up, and automatically it'll start to connect the dots and think, oh, that could be risky. Oh, that's risky. That was risky. So, I mean, one thing I can think of that comes to mind with people living with Parkinson's and their caregivers is falls, right? Might have start to be very vigilant and worry about um, falling or choking, things like that, that are really worrisome and potentially dangerous things. And so, what we start to do is get nervous about anything that has to do with in the environment that is similar to another time when there was a fall or a big risk happening. So that mounts the anxiety and the tensions and the stress with us without even us registering it as such consciously. Okay, next slide, Kelly. Oh, yeah, interoception, sorry. So interoception is the capacity to be able to read what's going on in our bodies. Our heart rate, our breathing, hunger, fullness, temperature, pain, and also emotional experiences. So interoception is a really important skill to develop to help with nervous system regulation. Kind of helps us decide what's happening with us, where we want to concentrate, what part of the body might be needing some attention, um, or some, we might also say this, the body's constantly trying to express things to us. So somatic therapies really look at what's our body saying to us, and what does that, how does that unfold in our lives? Because we can get our tensions, our worries, our fears can kind of get stuck. They kind of get into patterning in our body that happens because of the tensions and the sort of activation processes that we need for survival. But then those patterns get stuck in us. So part of somatic work is looking at what's happening in our bodies and then what might we do to sort of express that in a different way? What might we do to be able to release some of these things that are getting held and stuck in us? So the noticing the moment by moment experiences with interoception can really help to open up some opportunities for some relief and some release uh, using body-based strategies. So if we look at the fight and flight system from your in your caregiving experience, usually what we're going to find is, again, that expression of anger, just like, oh, we might resist doing things, even though consciously we should be doing them, but we're kind of like holding off or feeling resistive in some way. It might not make any sense, but it's something that we almost feel like we need at that time. And then there's also escape behaviors, right? When things are that flight behavior, we might think of that as part of the avoidance of things maybe that you have to do that you're not doing, um, or just wanting to just kind of leave. You might kind of be there present, physically present, but emotionally you might just not be present, emotionally available for your care partner or for other people in your life. And that's sort of that distance that can happen and isolation that can happen because of nervous system overwhelm. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone identify with these pictures here? I just that one on the top left. It's just such a. Does anyone feel like that sometimes? All the time. Yeah. Right. All the time. Yeah. It's tiring, isn't it? Yeah. All of them. Mhm. Yes. Waking up and yet being exhausted. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. We're going to talk more about that process and what might be going on, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of people sharing these same experiences, right? And of course, they're kind of natural, aren't they? They're just part of being human. But it's also it's how often they happen and how long they're happening for. That becomes a gauge almost in terms of, oh my gosh, I want something different to happen for myself and for the person I care for. Yeah. Okay, Kelly, thank you for sharing, everyone. And Kelly, if you could advance the slide. So the freeze response is something that is very much talked about in somatic therapies, right? This is a response that is happens in the body for a number of reasons. One is that it's like a breaker goes off in the nervous system. It's just like it's too heavy, it's too much, and the nervous system can feel like it's almost like overheating and it has to slow down. It has to it has to be shut down more. And this can create a sense of disconnection, not only to your other people in your life, because it definitely disconnects you from other people, but it also starts to disconnect from your own experiences in your body. So in a freeze response, you might feel numb. You might feel foggy and disconnected. Um, and the freeze response itself is also part of it's a response that allows us to slow down and get smaller and be still, which is protective in the wild, right? Sort of a very mammalian sort of response. But it also is allows us to start looking around and being when we're in a fight and flight mode, we are not stopping to take account of what's going on, right? We're running, we're fighting. When we're in a freeze response, we are observing. We're better able in some ways to be able to look around and observe what's going on. But the challenge can be that if we're observing only for threat in this response, we're only seeing part of the picture. We're not seeing everything that's available to us. We're typically only going to be vigilant in watching for what's going to happen next. What are the bad things that are happening in this environment or in this scenario, right? So the freeze response is beneficial for us in some ways because it kind of shuts things down. But if we do have this response, we only want it for a short time, not for a duration of time because it cuts us off from other people and ourselves, and it also limits our our viewpoint of what's possible for us. And this is parasympathetic, by the way. It's a sorry, so there are, if you've heard of the vagus nerve, so the freeze response can be discussed in terms of vagus nerve theory. So there's two different branches of the vagus nerve. One of them is the dorsal vagal, which is along sort of closer to the back of the body, and that is the one that is thought of to be sort of contributing mostly to the freeze response. The ventral vagal system, which is innervating the front of the body, is actually a counter to the dorsal vagal, and that is relates to opening up. It relates to connecting. It relates to receiving, giving, and receiving support in a way that we can't do if we're in a dorsal vagal kind of shut down mode. Okay, thanks, Kelly. Another topic. Oh, freeze. Okay, sorry. Someone had a question. Are you? That's a really interesting question, Jane. So Jane asked a question about like, are you saying that the freeze response makes someone somewhat paranoid? Um, that's a curious question. I wouldn't characterize it as paranoia, but it could be seen as an over hyper focus, right? We can get focused on protection and threat. So I guess in that way, it could be characterized as being paranoid, but not in a sense of the way you might see other people might talk about paranoia. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Okay, we can move on, and I can stop it if I see what other answers you have for me, Jane. Um, Merging and joining. So these are also two very important concepts to explore. Merging is kind of like what they were talking about with compassion fatigue. It's when an individual starts to take on the suffering of others as though the experiences are happening in their own nervous systems. And we can do this for a number of reasons. I mean, it sort of can be just a natural way of making it through, and we can't find out any other option. We kind of just have to survive. And sometimes we just start doing stuff that helps us get through the day or gets through the moment, right? We can also learn, though, that merging can emerge because we've seen it throughout our own lives. We've seen it people in our lives support people who are dependent, maybe give up huge things in their lives in order to, be of service to others. And so the merging can come also because of what we learn is sort of the right thing to do. Or to be a good person in the world means I can't think about myself because that would be selfish. And so I'm going to focus on how I need to meet the needs of the other person, but in such a way that there's a very blurry boundary about where I end and where the other person begins, right? So that is part of the merging process. Joining, on the other hand, relates to still showing compassion and being sort of emotionally present for the other person, but in a way that you're beside them, that you're joining them and understanding, but you have a very clear sense of where your boundaries end and where the other person's boundaries begin, right? So merging is like this, and joining is more like this. You sort of still can maintain being close, but you still have some distinction and distance. Any questions about those? It takes a moment to type in there. Doesn't look like any right now. Okay, Kelly. So disappearing is another one. Now, the reason, this really goes with merging, right? And in essence, I've already described what disappearing can be. And this is just a term I'm using. It's not something that you see in the books, but really, that's a picture of an eclipse. So this is a very common, if anyone's worked with me, they know I use this quite often. It's like the needs of the person that you're caring for, their vulnerability actually has a lot of power. And we might not see it as that, or, initially, but people who are vulnerable around us actually, you know, people start working toward supporting them, and to a point where they can feel like there's a disproportionate amount of power for the person who actually has the condition. Kind of ironic, but that can happen, because that usually happens because the needs of that person eclipse our own needs. Now, we know that other person that we're caring for isn't doing that to us, or sometimes we kind of feel like they are, but really it's not them doing it to us. It's like the process just, things unfolded and all of a sudden we lost ourselves. And so that other person's needs eclipse our own. And that's to the point where we might not even be able to identify what our needs are. Like, people will say to me, I'll say, well, what do you think you need right there and there now? And they're like, I don't even know what I need. I haven't thought about my own needs for so many months or years. I honestly don't know what I need. I don't even know who I am anymore. So I'm curious about that as well. Are people listening? Are you experiencing that? Is that something that you sense is happening for you? That sort of almost like you're you don't even know what your needs are anymore. See anyone there? Okay. Okay, let's move on. So we talked about that exhausted and sort of really tired feeling, but also sort of waking up in the middle of the night. That might be something called functional freeze. And again, this isn't a medical term, but it is used in the somatic experiencing world. That functional freeze is a state where you can be functioning quite well, and quite often you're kind of on during the day doing everything, whether it's your occupation and your caregiving, your parenting, your multiple roles that you might be involved in. Um, and that is you have enough focus on that because it's actually being fueled by a lot of sympathetic nervous system, sort of adrenaline almost going for you. So your nervous system's actually kind of really revved up. Um, but there's also like a freeze state that can be simultaneously happening, or sometimes the freeze state happens after all the work's done. And that state is just like a breaker goes off. You're stuck on the couch. You can't do the stuff you want to do. You have no more energy left. Maybe someone says, oh, you should be exercising more, you should be doing things for yourself. But instead, and you should be doing it consciously, but your brain, your body it doesn't allow you to do that. Yeah. So I'm saying, yeah, no time, no matter how fast one works, there's no time to do anything. Yeah. It feels like that. Yeah. And I'm sure it is like that by the clock. Yeah. So that functional freeze state can be one of the reasons where, even if you have a little bit of time, you might not use it in the way you want to, because it's just like the usually this happens because the sympathetic nervous system, kind of that survival mode, gets you going, and then you actually run out of gas. You don't have any energy left. Um, so you can feel like this tired and wired. You can feel that at the same time. And the reason I have this car there is because I always talk about it's like having your one foot on the gas and the other foot on the brake at the same time. So you're spinning your wheels and using a lot of energy, but you're not necessarily getting to where you want to go when you're in functional freeze. Okay, and the next slide. So here again, if anyone wants to share that sense of whether or not you might be in functional freeze or think you kind of identify with some of these signs. One question I usually ask is, when's the last time you either didn't make an appointment for yourself or that you canceled an appointment for your own needs in order to meet the needs of the person that you're caring for? Yeah, quickly feeling overwhelmed. Yeah, not a lot of reserve, right? Oops. Ah, happened as soon as just as recent as this morning. Yeah, Allison was sharing. Yes, staying at home, right? It's like you want to go out, your friends might even be asking you out, or you want to go out somewhere, and it's just too much effort. It's like you don't have any energy to be even just to go out and do the stuff. Like, let's say you have respite care, even, and you want all to do all this stuff for when you have respite care, and then it just doesn't happen. Yeah. Avoiding other people and friends. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. And I'm wondering, if that avoidance too, is it about, not, um, not having the energy to tell your stories, or maybe not feeling like they wanna hear what you have to say? Or is it about, not, wanting to do something completely different on one hand, but also feeling like you can't really invest the energy that you want to, so you just instead don't go out? Yes. It's so much work to set up the respite care, right? I know they always say it in the books like, "Oh, get help and get the respite." It's difficult, and then what if they don't come? And all the things that happen when you kinda work to get things set up, and then you're too exhausted to do what you wanna do for yourself. Yeah. Yes. And putting off and procrastinating and putting off tasks, those are interesting things that we can talk about um, set after the session in terms of the questions. Ah, yes. Again, what are you going to talk about if your world is mostly around these two, your caregiving role? Yeah, yeah. You should, yes, you should. Well, you should do this, right? I had one person say to me, over the years, it was like, if someone tells me to take a warm bath right now, like I'm going to lose it. Like this will not be fixed with a warm bath. It's a lot that you're coping with and dealing with on the daily. Yeah. Okay. And I think I have a message, but I don't know. Okay. And so let's advance the slide one more time. Great. Okay. So this part of this process, like I said, is about orienting to where you are, validating all the stuff that's going on with you, knowing that there's a lot going on, and to how do you start to open up access to the resources that are possibly there for you. And remember, we're going to be talking about internal resources first, as well as the external resources that you can find that on a Google link, but it's not always about not knowing where the resources are. It's having enough energy and drive and focus to be able to access the resources that are available. Okay, so let's advance the slide one more time. So we can look at resourcing in different ways, right? And this term resourcing is something that's used in counseling and somatic counseling. One of them is, that's a stomach on the left-hand side. So that's supposed to be for the rest and digest system. Looking at what sort of strategies and what sort of approaches in the here and now help to create a sense of space, create a sense where there's neutrality. There's no judgment that's required. There's nothing required of you in terms of fixing or doing. So it's a safe space. It's a space that might be the neuroception, that part of our nervous systems might read that this is a place that makes no demands of me. Let's just put it that way, right? Because we do use the term safe and safety, but it's not always a conscious type of safety. It's more of a sense of release. It's where you can go from, I'm on guard, which would be this sympathetic nervous system activating, our muscles get tense, our bodies hold very differently, and where we can just go, huh, just a little. It doesn't have to be like complete, peaceful, happy times. It has to be just a little different. That's enough to get the ball rolling. So we want to look at sensory experiences using interoception. We want to look at sensory experiences that help us to know where we might be holding tension, where there might be stories told by your nervous systems that we're not listening to because we're just too focused on other things. We're just too focused on something that's not ourselves. So something as simple as sitting for 3 minutes and paying attention to the body and noticing is a highly validating thing. It can make such a difference. It can boost your energy. It can release muscles without any physical sort of releasing, stretching. It just sort of allows us to go, oh, okay. Your body goes, oh, she knows we're here. Oh, okay. This is a place to be that feels a little bit safer, a little bit more room than I felt before. And why this is important is because some of these strategies help to what we can say complete cycles of self-preservation, right? So in other words, there's going to be lots of situations where we could encounter significant challenges and we couldn't enact anything to be able to help ourselves. There just wasn't the space or time. There just wasn't the capacity or knowledge. So an example might be if we notice, encounter someone falling in front of us. I'll use that again, right? It's a very worrisome thing to kind of see things happening and we're not able to stop this event. And even though might have very few impacts, but it might have huge impacts. It might be a very big event. So that sort of inability to be able to cope with that in the time kind of gets held in the body, like it increases our vigilance and our worry and sort of the tensions we have around something like the potential for falls. And so walking things through, even in our mind's eye, about what we might be able to do, what we might be able to do to help ourselves, or what we might be able to do to notice what difference we made either before or after the fall, and sort of pay attention to that stuff, that ends up allowing our bodies to feel like they didn't kind of get stuck partway through. It allows our nervous systems to go, okay, this was difficult. This was hard. I did what I could. And I'm imagining that I would do something even more comforting, or even something more safe for myself and for the other person. You can use your imagination as well in these processes to settle your nervous system. It just says, oh, okay, that felt like I can let that go now. And that it's something that happens with somatic therapies quite often. I hope that makes sense. We're just kind of broad brushstroking this stuff. I could certainly talk a little bit more about it. Grounding. So one of the biggest things we look at for body-based work is our sense of being connected. And I'm wondering if we can use a little short grounding exercise right now to be able to sense into that feeling of being connected and being supported by the ground. So if you feel able and interested, I welcome you to find, if you're in a chair or even if your feet are up, it doesn't matter. Grounding doesn't have to mean we go outside. Although this person, the picture of the person's part in the trees, which can be very nice and help us with grounding. But what I'm going to suggest is that we just sort of take a moment and notice your feet, the bottom of your feet, or your heels, or the back of your legs if your feet are up. And we're really just paying attention to things like, huh, there are my feet. We don't do that when we're super busy. We don't do that when we're met with a bunch of stress. We don't go, oh, I wonder what my feet are doing now. Right? This is an opportunity to start noticing, oh, okay, there are my feet. You might try and press your right foot down just for 3 seconds and release it. And then your left foot down and release it. Both feet down and release them. And do it again. Right, left, both. One more time. Right, left, both. Okay. That's a simple grounding technique. You might have many more to share. I welcome people sharing a list if they want. We could circulate it. And after we do this exercise, there's still that sense of noticing our feet. And you might notice that there's a stillness. There's a stillness on the floor or the ground. And you might imagine your body in the seat that you're in. or the place that you're resting. You notice the presence of your body there too. The back of your legs, your back, what part of your body is meeting whatever is supporting you. And that support can be very helpful for you, noticing that support. So even when there's no support available to you that you can find anywhere else, just recognizing the support of a chair or the ground can be very helpful for your nervous system. Does anyone want to share what they've experienced in terms of this little exercise? Anything that you're noticing? I'm not sure if people are still resting or if they're something to consider. Usually people feel a sense of stillness. And just a minute or two or a second or two can help you. Peacefulness. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on. Kelly, thanks. Orienting is another experience. Yes, focusing on something else. Lovely. Gentle chair yoga. That's super. So orienting is kind of what we've already talked about, is using an interoception and other ways. You're using your nervous system to notice things around you, to register what's available for you in your environment. What kind of spaces or zones are available for you where you feel a little bit of release? That helps you gain perspective also on some external forces and demands, because you feel like you have a little bit more space from them usually. And you can make some more decisions. They don't feel like they're just so right here all the time for you. So orienting is another tool that we use, and we can use it visually. We can listen for sounds. We can look at things that are pleasing or interesting for us. We might notice when things are close to us and far away. And in practicing listening for sounds that are close and far away, we might actually gain some more insight into what pressures we feel that are, maybe there are some that we can feel a little bit more distance from and gain it that way by first doing something somatically that helps our bodies to notice distance. And then psychologically, we can start to feel that there's more distance between the expectations that are on us or the pressures that we feel. Okay, next one, Kelly. Titration and pendulation, another two terms that we use a lot in somatic therapy that are related to a little bit goes a long way. You don't need to dive, right? If you have no time or energy to go into counseling or therapy where it's like heavy duty, because you really can't dig yourself out of a hole after it, it's like too much, you think. Sometimes knowing that titration means you just do a little bit at a time and then you leave. So you can get close to what's going on, but you don't have to stay there. You just want to notice where it's at, feel some of the feelings associated with that, learn to digest and integrate those feelings, and then not feel overwhelmed by it. So titration is part of that, and pendulation is part of that process where you go near the problem, put your hand in the cold water, but you don't have to dive right in. You take your hand out again, but you know it's cold and you know what you want to do to warm up and cope with that cold, but you don't have to dive into the whole thing all at once. So titration and pendulation are important in being able to get the help you need without feeling overwhelmed. Okay, next slide, please. And again, I always like this, how much does a ton of feathers weigh, right? Still a ton. So little things add up. And so the little things you do that might make a difference for you will have a bigger impact over time, right? The little things we do, the things that happen to us build up, even if they're small things, they still create burden. And we can look at that from the other way. Little things you start to do can have a big effect over time. Okay, thanks, Kelly. Now, grief process, I know, Kelly, I'm way over time, aren't I? I'm sorry. Timing's all. How much time do we have?
It's all right. It really depends on the people.
How are you guys doing?
Yeah. Um,
Um, we can look at grief, loving it. Okay. Oh, goodness. Thank you. Okay. So I'll introduce this. If people do have to go, if you have respite or something, you have to go, you can always call me. We can talk about stuff in this, and we can make it part of a process through Parkinson Society. So I want to offer that opportunity for people who have to take off. However, I will say this with grief, right? Kind of like what I was talking about. There can be waves of overwhelm that come with the losses and changes that are involved in caregiving, but sometimes they can just trickle through, right? If you have a tap and you have a way of opening up the tap when you want to kind of work on things, then you can close the tap so you still have enough energy to do the other things you need to do in your life. That is something that is very helpful to explore in a counseling setting or with a support group setting where you get to do a little bit at a time and still feel like you have some energy left. Yes, I can email you the information. And the next slide, Kelly. Fighting grief. I just want to mention this. When you're busy working through everything and you feel that you don't have enough time to feel feelings, that's what we might call fighting grief. And studies have shown that, stealing it out and maybe only want to think about the best things possible or not even going there at all can actually increase your stress levels quite significantly. So fighting grief is something to explore. Are you noticing that you have any time to explore emotional experiences that are related to what we may call ambiguous grief, the sort of losses and changes that are related to shifts in the person you care for's approach or attitude or personality or little things that they can't do anymore. They might not seem too big to anybody else, but they can still add to your sense of grief. And so sometimes we kind of just want to push through that or not think about it at all. And that can lead to sort of this process of fighting, which is actually more like the fight flight mode, the sympathetic nervous system. And what we want to do is just make some space to know that there's ways to let that grief be processed and talked about and felt in a way that still can leave you a little bit more energy and a little bit more hope. Last thing is self-compassion. We talked about at the beginning about how self, criticism and limitations are part of caregiver burden and sort of processes like that, burnout. So please look into someone like Kristen Neff's work on how to be more self-compassionate. She's got great, very short and longer um, um, recordings that you can listen to that walk through exercises to do with self-compassion. And just asking that question, how do I typically act towards myself in difficult times? What can you do in your own perception of knowing you're doing enough? You are where you need to be. You are working as hard as you can. And what sort of messages do you tell yourself that allow you to feel like you have um, some more acceptance and compassion for where you're at? We could say possibly that compassion fatigue is really about not having compassion for ourselves first, as well as starting to lose compassion for other people. Okay, and the last one there. So This is a summary. Try to look at some relatively novel ways to explore your caregiver experiences. There's a lot of stuff out there on the internet about lots of great supports and options. I just wanted to add in this nervous system regulation idea that might be helpful for you. And looking at the resources of slowing down, even for a moment, body-oriented experiences that help you to decrease the stress response, and it will actually likely help you feel a little bit more energy and some more focus. And it can also be very helpful for you to start to understand, what are my needs? What am I needing? How am I going to ask for those needs? We won't be able to get necessarily ask other people for help if we don't actually know what we need. So that's that. Thank you. There's a bibliography at the end of this. I can send you a separate bibliography. I'm just opening it up for more conversation if anyone has any time